Thank you all for being here. Thanks for coming to the In Defense of Christians Congressional briefing on the ongoing atrocities against Christians in Nigeria. I'm Richard Gazelle, Executive Director of In Defense of Christians. Thank you all for joining us on Capitol Hill today. And for those watching us at home online, we're also grateful to have you as well. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the U.S. House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa for making today's congressional briefing possible and hosting us today. Today, Nigeria stands as the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. In 2023, upwards of 5,000 Christians in Nigeria were killed for their faith at the hands of Boko Haram, ISIS's Nigerian franchise, and Fulani militants. Christians killed in Nigeria account for over 80% of all religious-based murders of Christians globally. Not only has the Nigerian government failed to respond effectively to the crisis, but its actions have actually made a bad situation even worse by responding to atrocities with more atrocities. Unfortunately, the U.S. government, particularly the U.S. State Department, has turned a blind eye to this ongoing crisis, culminating with the decision to remove Nigeria's designation as a country of particular concern. Last year, Congressman Chris Smith introduced House Resolution 82, which, among other things, seeks to urge the U.S. State Department to restore Nigeria's designation as a country of particular concern and take other measures to mitigate and end the human crisis unfolding in Nigeria. Today's congressional briefing is an important opportunity to underscore the ongoing tragedy in Nigeria and provide momentum behind House Resolution 82, which recently made it through committee and is waiting for a vote by the full House of Representatives. Today's deep dive briefing will feature remarks from some of the world's foremost experts on Nigeria, international religious freedom, genocide, and Christian persecution. We'll also hear from key members of Congress who are championing the adoption of House Resolution 82. Our first speaker this afternoon will be Professor Robert Destro. Professor Destro is a professor of law at the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law, where he focuses on international human rights and religious freedom, among other areas. He previously served as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Professor Destro, thanks for coming.
Thank you. And I brought a couple of visuals. Why don't we just get started with those? And I'm sorry, I'll apologize in advance. I'm going to have to bug out right around 3 because I have to teach a class at 4. So, all right, so I want to focus on what Richard was just talking about, House Resolution 82. I mean, that's job one. We need to get that done. And the reason is that we need to get Congress's attention, not only in the horrific situation in Nigeria, but in the Sahel region as a whole. I mean, we don't have good data about where people are getting massacred, but they're being massacred in other places beyond Nigeria. And what we need to be doing is starting to solve the problem. And the only way we can solve that problem is to, at least on this side, we have to decide what the problem is. And so from my perspective, having been inside the State Department, having lived through the interminable genocide discussions, having worked with the bureaucracy, the first problem, and that's the one that House Resolution 82 is aimed at, is us. We have to get our own act together. We have to know what our position is. And of course, the bottom line is the killing has got to stop. But the question becomes, how do we do that? How do we marshal our resources, both human and financial? And how do we get everybody focused on that question? Now, what I've done, I grew up as a middle kid, and so I tend to want to go out and talk to people and try and bring people together, and I really like building coalitions. And that's what the purpose of House Resolution 82 has been. And so the fact of the matter is that we need a list of members that we need to vote. And we need to get this vote done before the summer recess. And because otherwise we have to start over. So the question is, how do we do that? The first way we do that is understand that it's not just Christians who are being slaughtered. In fact, I had a long conversation with a very well-known imam here in the Washington area not long ago, and he said, well, if you really want to reach out to the Muslim community both here and in Nigeria, hey, just let me know. And so, I mean, that's, as soon as school's over, that's going to be one of my things to do. The United States government has no coherent strategy in either Nigeria or anywhere else in Africa. That's a problem. Now, the problem is you can't go to the State Department and say to people, hey, you need to develop a strategy, because that's not the way bureaucracies work. The way bureaucracies work is you give them a strategy and say, this is what we need to do. Now, most bureaucrats aren't going to pay any attention to you unless a member of Congress brings it to them. Especially a member of Congress who's on the Appropriations Committee. Then all of a sudden you get people's attention. Now, the United States official position is that the violence in Nigeria is complicated. Okay, could you switch to the next slide? You bet it's complicated. Nigeria is one of the most diverse ethnically and linguistically and cultural countries in the entire world. Now, Americans don't think of Black Africans as being ethnic like white ethnics are. Now, why that is escapes me. I just don't understand. Somebody told me many years ago, he says, it's not really a good idea to talk about African issues because Africa is kind of a big place. Really? I mean, that's part of the problem that we have, is that people don't understand that within Nigeria, as you can see up in the north where the Fulani live, that's a huge area. I would ask you, venture to say, ask the State Department how many Hausa speakers there are. The answer is going to be scarce as hen's teeth. We don't have the resources. We need to understand the ethnic diversity of Nigeria. And that is one of the things that makes things complicated. You think Europe's complicated? Africa is way more complicated. And so if you wouldn't mind switching. Most Americans have no idea how big Nigeria is. That is what Nigeria would look like if it were superimposed on the Northeast. It's enormous. And it's enormous, and it is incredibly diverse. So even if you could get everybody going in the same direction on something as simple as security policy, I mean, they can't even, they have a colonial legacy. It's called no local police. Okay, that is one of the biggest colonial legacies in Nigeria. If you wouldn't mind switching to the next one. Now, all over the news is Ukraine. That is what Nigeria would look like if superimposed over East Central Europe. I mean, and when we talk about the enmity between the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Poles and all the other people who have been fighting for centuries, we're surprised that there's unrest in other places? If we could bring half of the zeal we bring to East Central Europe to Africa, we'd be cooking with gas, so to speak. And Nigeria, by the way, has a lot of it. Okay, let's switch one more. Hey, the other issue, and this I get from a very good friend who is at the State Department. Now, we were not talking about Africa when we had this conversation. We were talking about the Caribbean. He said, but the same thing is true. I asked him afterwards, I said, the same thing true for Africa? Absolutely. Okay, that's the yellow band is the Sahel. Okay, and the countries of the Sahel are you can see kind of that northwest corner of Africa that is not the Mediterranean. That is the playground of the Russians, of the French, of the Americans, and the Chinese. And when I asked him about why is it that we don't seem to have a coherent strategy, he said, because, Bob, he says, you and I are both old enough to remember Mad Magazine's Spy versus Spy. He says, we have always seen the Caribbean and Africa as the playground of the superpowers, and we don't give a damn about the people who live there. Okay? And when I asked him, well, what would you think if we brought some leaders in and then told the Americans just to shut up and listen, and then we could figure out what we need to do on specific things? And he just looked at me and he says, that would be revolutionary. And I said, I don't get it. He says, we don't talk to people. Okay, so if I have any advice for this group, is that we need to be working with those of you very closely who are on the ground working in Nigeria and listening to what they need. In the course of a video call the other day, I heard somebody talk about, well, let's see if we can't collect some money for drones. And I thought, wow, yeah, it's not, they're not rifles, they're drones. If people had at least a fighting chance of seeing them coming through the forest. There's all kinds of stuff going on in Nigeria on the coalition building, on the economic side. There's lots of things we can do, and I'm just happy to have been invited today and be able to share a few thoughts with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor. Our next speaker, Kola Alapini, is an international human rights attorney who provides legal defense in freedom of religion cases and fights against blasphemy laws in Nigeria. He holds a master's degree in international human rights law from Essex Law School in the UK, and we're honored to have him with us today to provide his practical expertise. Kola.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a tough act to speak after Prof has spoken. Well, I have some notes here to help. I wish to speak about the various blasphemy laws and the attendant mob violence that harms Christians, minority Muslims, and people of no faith in Nigeria. These are a major concern. In early March 2020, a young man named Yahya Sharif Aminu was arrested in Kano State, Nigeria, by the local Isba police. That's the Islamic morality police in northern Nigeria. He was charged with blasphemy under Section 382, subsection B of the Kano State Sharia Penal Code Law of 2000. I currently lead his legal team, and Yahya is still detained in prison. But back in March 2020, Yahya had no lawyer, didn't receive one during his initial trial because everybody was scared of coming out to defend him due to fear of reprisal attacks. Yahya is a Sufi Muslim and a musician. Just a few days prior to his arrest, Yahya shared some impressionistic song lyrics in a private WhatsApp group. The lyrics were spread by others in the group who interpreted the lyrics to be an insult to the Prophet Muhammad because they were interpreted as placing another prophet above Muhammad. For this alleged blasphemy, these men stirred up a mob, destroyed Yahya's home, and demanded his arrest. He went into hiding, but he was discovered shortly after. The penalty for Yahya Sharif Aminu's alleged blasphemy under the Kano State Sharia Penal Code is death. Section 382, subsection B, makes it illegal for a person to call himself a Muslim, to insult the Quran or any of its prophets, and hold those convicted liable to death. 12 of the northern Nigerian states have similar death penalty blasphemy laws in the Sharia Penal Codes, which began to be introduced in northern Nigeria in the early 2000s. These 12 states are overwhelmingly Muslim, although they have significant minorities of Christians and traditional African religious practitioners. Due to the criminal Sharia laws, Nigeria is one of only 7 countries in the world to have blasphemy laws for which a person can be put to death. Yahya was then prosecuted by the Attorney General of Kano State. He was denied legal representative during the trial that ensued in March 2020. He was held incommunicado from family members. On the 10th of August 2020, the Hausawa Filling Hockey Upper Sharia Court convicted him of violating Section 382B of the Kano State Sharia Penal Code and was sentenced to death by hanging. The governor of Kano State said shortly thereafter that he would not hesitate to sign the execution order. That's when I became Yaya's lawyer and the lawyer for another person. He was a minor. His name was Omar Farouk. At the time when we stepped in, we thought he was 13 years old because that was what was reported in the international media. We didn't get to know his real age until the day which we got him out of prison. He was actually 17, but he looked malnourished and everybody thought he was 13. He was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, and we were able to overturn this imprisonment as well. Now we're asking the Supreme Court of Nigeria to find Kano State's death penalty blasphemy law to be unconstitutional and in violation of international treaties to which Nigeria is bound. Yaya has been sitting in a prison cell for 4 years because of his song lyrics. Amongst other things which we're also asking the Supreme Court to do is to strike down the parts of this Sharia penal code which violates the rights to human dignity. If Nigeria has signed up to international treaties and conventions, such as the ICCPR and the African Charter, we have no business in chopping off people's limbs, stoning people to death for adultery, or simply lashing people for doing something wrong under the supposed Kano State Penal Code or the penal codes of Northern Nigeria. It will be a failure on our part to uphold international law. It's as simple as that. So the Supreme Court has to pronounce on this legislation. Kano State cannot be law unto itself, or the whole of Northern Nigeria cannot be law unto themselves if Nigeria as a state party has deposed to these legislation or these treaties. The Northern Nigeria death penalty blasphemy law plainly contradicts the Nigerian Constitution of 1999, which protects religious freedom and freedom of speech and prevents the government's establishment of any religion. Similarly, Nigeria's death penalty blasphemy law plainly violates international law and will plainly violate the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution if they were enacted here. I am pleased to see that the case of Yahya Sharif Aminu and other blasphemy-related cases are raised within the amended version of the House of Representatives proposed Resolution 82 concerning Nigeria's religious freedom violations, as well as the problem of Nigeria's blasphemy laws. The use of the blasphemy laws in Nigeria is egregious, systematic, and ongoing. I fully support the language in the amended resolution asking the U.S. Secretary of State to publicly call for the immediate release of all individuals charged with or convicted of blasphemy-related charges in Nigeria and devote all necessary resources to secure their release and ensure their safety and that of their families. The U.S. has an enormous voice on the international stage, including within Nigeria, and the call for the release of those detained and imprisoned on blasphemy-related charges will do much good in helping to secure their release. Yahya Sharif's and Omar Farouk's cases are not isolated. The death penalty blasphemy law has been used on others, including the Sufi cleric Sheikh Abdul Jabbar Nasiru Kabara and Sufi Muslim Abdul Inyas. Nigeria also maintains non-Sharia blasphemy laws, although these are styled as religious insults and public disturbance laws. These secular blasphemy laws exist across the whole country, punishing religious insults and public disturbance, not just in the north, but are enforced primarily in northern states and rarely enforced in the southern states. These secular blasphemy laws can be applied to anyone, Muslims, Christians, traditionalists, humanists, or others. All of these blasphemy laws implicitly encourage an atmosphere of mob violence based on blasphemy accusations. Yahya Sharif Aminu and Farouk's cases demonstrate that fact. House Resolution 82 also describes the horrific case of Deborah Yakubu, a Christian student attending college in Sokoto State, who faced allegations of blasphemy in May 2022 because of comments she made regarding her Christian faith on a classroom WhatsApp channel. For those comments, our largely Muslim classmates whipped up a large mob, they beat her, they stoned her to death on campus, and then they set her body on fire. The police did not intervene to stop the mob. Only 2 students out of dozens were arrested and later were released with prejudice for failure to prosecute. It's very rare for mob attackers to be arrested and prosecuted. Neither Yahya Sharif Aminu's or Omar Farouk's attackers were arrested. The secular blasphemy laws are used frequently as well in the north. Rhoda Jatau is a Christian woman, a nurse and mother of 5. She allegedly shared a video in May 2022 with her colleagues that was created by someone else condemning the attack on Deborah Yakubu. Simply because she allegedly shared that video, a video that has never been released by the police or prosecutors, a mob soon descended upon her neighborhood. They destroyed the storefronts, injuring individuals and calling for arrest. She was detained immediately in May 2022 and charged with blasphemy violations under sections 210 and 114 of the Bauchi State Penal Code in December 2022. Her trial began shortly thereafter. She was held incommunicado the entire time, with only occasional access to her lawyers and family at the hearings, until December 2023, when she finally obtained bail after national and international outcry. Her charges are yet to be dropped. Rhoda Jatau's case is also mentioned in House Resolution 82. Mubarak Bala is the former president of the Nigerian Humanist Association and used to be a Muslim. He was arrested under sections 210 and 114 of the Kano State Penal Code, which is substantially similar to Bauchi's, for alleged blasphemous Facebook posts he had made. He was convicted on over a dozen counts, as each post was considered a separate offense by the Kano State High Court. On the 5th of April 2022, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Mubarak Bala's case is mentioned in House Resolution 82. All of this activity related to blasphemy accusations in northern Nigeria over the past few years shows a worrisome trend. Thankfully, the international community is beginning to see how egregious these blasphemy laws in Nigeria are. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, the State Department, the European Union, UK parliamentarians, and UN experts have all made recent statements condemning these laws and the attendant mob violence. That is why we need the US Congress to make its voice heard. We need as many advocates as we can get, and the voice of the US government carries a strong weight worldwide and in Nigeria. I am hopeful that as more people see the reality of these blasphemy laws, these unjust prosecutions, this mob violence, and the religiously motivated violence in general plaguing so much of Nigeria, they will be inspired to raise their voices and act. The situation is no longer tolerable, but that is often where the hope of freedom truly begins to blossom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kola. Before we introduce the next speaker, I want to take this opportunity to remind the audience that we will have a question and answer portion after the conclusion of each set of remarks, so please feel free to save those for when the time comes. Our next speaker is Nadine Manza. She's president of the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, an international organization focused on building infrastructure to support the religious freedom movement globally. She also serves as Global Fellow at the Wilson Center. Nadine is a former chairperson of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and since 2020 has served on IDC's Board of Advisors. In 2021, she was awarded the IDC Annual Cedar of God Award for her tireless work in support of Christians persecuted in the Middle East and around the world. Welcome, Nadine.
Thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you to my panelists for already the powerful remarks, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of you. When I was appointed as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, in 2018, Nigeria was one of the 16 countries USCIRF recommended as a country of particular concern, or a CPC, because of its severe violations of religious freedom. And so when assessing conditions globally, it was clear Nigeria's conditions were deteriorating even then, and it was alarming. In December 2020, Secretary of State Pompeo agreed. I should say it was a special watch list, and then it agreed and put him on a country of particular concern for engaging in tolerating systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom. There was a real hope at that moment that the U.S. and the international community would work with President Buhari to improve conditions, change laws, hold perpetrators accountable. Unfortunately, in less than a year, in November 2021, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken removed Nigeria as a CPC. He even skipped adding Nigeria to the special watch list. No explanation. There were no longer any lists as a government that Nigeria committed or tolerated religious freedom violations. At USERF, when I was then serving as chair, we were united in our frustration with a statement saying that we were, quote, appalled at the administration's removal of Nigeria from the list of violators of religious freedom. It's fair to say every commission since mine has had the same urgent tone. Since then, religious freedom conditions continue to decline. So what does that mean? It means enormous suffering, increased kidnappings, rapes, land appropriation, displacement, death. It also means Nigeria could end up as a failed state. As the largest democracy, economy, and most populated country in Africa, the impact on the region and the continent would be devastating, incomprehensible. Of course, there are many problems in Nigeria to get them to this place, mainly the quality of governance and endemic corruption. According to the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index, they rank 120 out of 142 in the rule of law. They rank 121 out of 142 in corruption. And they rank 139 out of 142 on order and security. They're among the richest countries in Africa. It reminds me of Iraq in that regard. Where does all that money go from oil and gas? So no one at this briefing is saying the entire problems in Nigeria are about religious freedom violations. What we're trying to say is this: you can't improve conditions in Nigeria by ignoring the truth of what is happening on the ground. As you've heard, there were more Christians killed in Nigeria last year than the rest of the world combined. Thousands are being targeted and killed based on their religious identity. Christian leaders are being kidnapped. If we don't acknowledge the depths of the conflict in society, it will be impossible to craft solutions to improve conditions for the people of Nigeria. Let's look at some of these other measures that tell us about the conditions. Pew Research Center has just released updated indexes on the government restrictions on religion and social hostilities on religion. And guess where Nigeria ranks on social hostilities based on religion? They are, out of 198 countries, they rank number 1. They have a score of 8.9, up from 8.5 at the last assessment. That's from a 1 to 10. Now, let me tell you, I have sat with a government official who didn't only say that religion didn't play much of a role, but literally said it didn't play any role in the conflict in Nigeria. Yet, the Pew Research has them number 1 out of 109 countries for social hostilities based on religion. When you look at the rest of Africa, Mali is at 7.0, and to Nigeria's 8.9, and then Somalia at 6.6. Below Nigeria, in the very high category, are India, Syria, Israel, Egypt, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Nigeria was rated as moderate on the government restrictions on religion with a score of 4.3. Another important measure is the Early Warning Project, countries at risk for mass killings. And this is put out by the U.S. Holocaust Museum of Simon Schreikat Center for the Prevention of Genocide and Dartmouth University. The Holocaust Museum identifies Nigeria as having ongoing mass killings with the violence from Boko Haram since 2009. Out of the 30 countries they identify at risk for a new mass killing, they list Nigeria at 12. So the number 12 in the entire world with 3.2 chance of a new mass killing. Afghanistan tops the list with Pakistan, Yemen, Sudan, India right behind. Another important measure is that of Open Doors World Watch List. They currently list Nigeria as the 6th worst place in the world to be a Christian. The only countries that are worse: North Korea, Somalia, Libya, Eritrea, and Yemen. Listed as better than Nigeria: Pakistan, Sudan, Iran, Afghanistan, India, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Yet the U.S. government and many in the international community continue to hold the narrative that religion is not a major factor. Considering all of these independent assessments that keep putting Nigeria at or among the top of the worst conditions for Christians on social hostilities based on religion and high risk for mass killings, how can anyone ignore these religious freedom conditions any longer? So I would recommend that the U.S. government follow USERF's recommendations to, first of all, designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern, appoint a special envoy for Nigeria in the Lake Chad region. In Nigeria, USERF's recommendations for Pakistan would also be really helpful for Nigeria, which is to force the U.S. to force the Nigerian government into a binding agreement and to work through benchmarks with actual dates and times, so that if they want our support, they need to meet these benchmarks. And also cross-cultural religious literacy for diplomats and government officials. I can't stress this more strong enough. I have talked to people who literally say to me, people are becoming less a religion around the world. That's actually not true. People are less religious in America, North America, and in Europe. But when you look at religiosity, Africa is actually very religious, as is the Middle East, and in fact becoming more religious. And when you look at numbers in the world, 57% of the world says that religion matters to them. Of over 40, under 40 is 51. But in sub-Saharan Africa, 89% of older people and only 88% of younger people, only 1 point difference, which means young people are also very religious in Nigeria and in Africa. And we need to be thinking through how can we encourage young people to have those relationships and to form a society that's going to accept one another, the human dignity of one another, regardless of ethnicity or religion. And so lastly, pointing to some of the things said already is whatever solutions need to be locally owned and locally run. We're not going to walk into Nigeria and tell them how to fix things. We need to empower the Nigerians to be able to have the kind of support they need, and the U.S. government needs to incentivize the Nigerian government to make the right choices. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Nadine. Our next speaker this afternoon is Congressman John Rose of Tennessee's 6th Congressional District. Congressman Rose is a co-sponsor of House Resolution 82 and a longtime champion of international religious freedom. He recently co-sponsored an article with IDC, which comprehensively highlights the unfolding atrocity of Christians in Nigeria. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you, and want to thank Defense of Christians for all you do to support people of faith around the world. Your organization plays a critical role in informing the public about what's happening to followers of Jesus all around the world. 82% of all religion-based murders in the world happened in Nigeria last year. In total, almost 5,000 of our brothers and sisters in Christ were taken in Nigeria by radical Islamic militants in 2023. Given that this place is so dangerous for Christians, it stands to reason that the White House should do all it can to condemn and protect against these human rights abuses. It's why I, along with many other members of Congress, are calling on President Biden and the White House to redesignate Nigeria as a country of particular concern, or CPC. If you recall, the Trump administration did so in 2022, but unfortunately the Biden administration inexplicably, in my view, reversed this decision not even a full year later. Despite what the Nigerian government claims, we know religious violence is a big problem in that country. Yet the Biden administration seems to be turning a blind eye, citing, quote, many factors as the cause for violence. They've even suggested climate change could be a motivating factor. How ridiculous. I proudly co-signed a letter urging Secretary of State Blinken to consider their decision to decertify Nigeria as a CPC. And I also co-sponsored a resolution on this issue expressing the sense of the entire U.S. House that Nigeria should be redesignated as a CPC. Unfortunately, this has been a heavily debated issue instead of a resoundingly bipartisan one. Some of the members on the other side of the aisle fail to see that by taking no action, we are sending a signal that the U.S. doesn't care about religious violence or that thousands of Christians have been slaughtered. By officially redesignating Nigeria as a country of particular concern, the U.S. would be able to take certain steps to hold individuals accountable for human rights abuses. And the designation would, frankly, at the very least, put some of these atrocities in a spotlight for the world to see. As a critical partner of the United States in the war on terrorism in Africa, Nigeria must be held accountable for its failure to stop religious violence within its own borders. The U.S. has supported the Nigerian military for over a decade in its own struggle against jihadists. It is evident that poor human rights standards in Nigeria only serve to extend the conflict. And the U.S. is now complicit, in my estimation, by omission, by turning a blind eye to a Nigerian military that has only perpetuated the violence. The United States must stand firmly against religious persecution within our borders and within the borders of those nations we consider to be our allies. I will continue my efforts here in Congress to ensure that Nigeria is once again redesignated as a country of particular concern, and will do my very best to convince other members to join me in that pursuit in the fight to protect Christians in Nigeria and around the world. Thank you for the opportunity to address the group.
Thank you, Congressman, for those remarks, and thank you for your tireless work in championing this cause in Congress. Our next speaker is Jacqueline Halbig von Schlappenbach, founder and CEO of Sovereign Global Solutions, a public affairs firm that defends religious freedom and advocates for the persecuted. And as excited I am to hear from Jacqueline, we'll actually just put her off just for a quick moment because I'd also like to welcome Representative John James from Michigan's 10th Congressional District. Chairman. Such a nice welcome. How could you follow that act, right? Congressman James is chairman of the House Subcommittee on Africa and co-sponsor of House Resolution 82. We welcome you up.
I appreciate your time and patience. I know you're all well acquainted with having to be flexible. In the military, we call it semper gumby, always flexible. But I'm honored to be with you all gathered here today to discuss extremely important issue of religious freedom in Nigeria. I'm often reminded the Lord says, "You are your brother's keeper." With that, I believe it is my duty as the chairman of House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, and also as a child of God, to bring national and international attention to the plight of Christians in Nigeria as the many international crises of today fight for the world's attention. As you might have seen, I held a hearing in February on this very topic. During that hearing, members of my subcommittee heard from a distinguished panel of witnesses, including Frank Wolf, who authored the International Religious Freedom Act, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe, who oversees the Makurdi Diocese in Benue State in Nigeria. Bishop Anagbe spoke at length about the horrors he witnessed and the religious persecution that Christians in his diocese experience. It's a tragedy that Christians continue to be targeted and killed for their faith around the world. As we recently celebrated the Easter season, I was reminded of the privilege that we have of living in America, the freedom that I have to practice my religion in peace without fear of retribution. Christians in Nigeria have every reason to fear for their lives and safety during this religious holiday. There is an emerging pattern of attacks occurring around religious holidays. Last Easter, Christians were killed in attacks. Last Christmas, over 300 Nigerians in the Middle Belt were killed in a coordinated attack that spanned over 4 days. Fulani militants burned homes and villages as the attacks were carried out. Just a few weeks ago, over Easter, at least 10 Christians were killed. An estimated 3 million Nigerians are displaced due to religious violence and insurgency threats and are forced to live in inhumane conditions in IDP camps. Yet, the population of Christians continues to grow. Praise the Lord. I saw reports that over 700 Christians were baptized this Easter in one diocese alone. We must use our voices to make clear to the Biden administration and every administration that comes after that we will not tolerate this lack of action in Nigeria where it's so clear that Christians are being actively targeted. The State Department has refused to send their so-called religious freedom ambassador to Nigeria to investigate. Every person around the world deserves the right to religious freedom, the right to practice their religion without fear, and I will continue to fight for that right here in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Congressman, and thank you for your continued championship on this issue. Our next speaker is Jacqueline Halbig von Schlappenbach, founder and CEO of Sovereign Global Solutions, a public affairs firm that defends religious freedom and advocates for the persecuted. She's a passionate champion for Christians in Nigeria and has previously served in a number of senior executive positions in the federal government and in civil society. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Richard, and In Defense of Christians, and also Chairman John James and the African Subcommittee for providing this time and place for this very important briefing on a subject that is so critical, critical and important to those of us who advocate on behalf of our persecuted brothers and sisters who are right now enduring senseless slaughtering, violence, abductions, and kidnapping for ransom. I'm going to present to you a bit of specific data that we are seeing in Nigeria, and then give you some specific examples of how survivors are living out their existence in IDP camps after being persecuted and pushed off their land. Lastly, I will end with an update of what we are doing to try and change this situation. A few things are going to sound like you've heard them before, but I'll delve into them a little bit differently. Nigeria has been called the powerhouse of Africa, and it is. It is the most populous country in Africa, and with an enormous oil and gas industry that makes it the wealthiest. But as of right now, Nigeria has become a killing field for defenseless Christians. The survival of 100 million Christians are at a crossroads. In general, many, including me, find it hard to believe that this is happening in the 21st century, and maybe that is why we're having a hard time getting traction. But Christians are the most persecuted group of people in the world. 360 million are being slaughtered around the world or being persecuted to greater and lesser degrees. In Nigeria, you heard this stat already, but Open Doors said that an alarming 89% of the world's Christian martyrs lost their lives in 2022. According to the International Society for Civil Liberties and Rule of Law, also known as Intersociety, they estimate that over 8,000 Christians were murdered for their faith between January 23 and January 2024, so the exact past year. This was the deadliest year on record in recent years. According to a report by the Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa, 2,400 Christians were abducted over a 6-month period between 2022 and 2023. Nigeria is now the deadliest place to be a Christian. Despite the disinterested mainstream media, some of the most recent examples have been so egregious that they have actually made the news. I'm going to zero in on a few of these. Just for the record, I will be speaking about some specific examples from Plateau and Benue State. You can see Benue is like very south there in the map, and Plateau is sort of right above it. Anyway, I'll get to that in a second. So the first example is from the Plateau State. As you just heard from Congressman John James, on Christmas Eve, it was a brutal, planned, and systemic attack that occurred in 26 Christian communities around their neighborhoods by militant Fulani herdsmen. Some data says 200, some says up to 300, depending on who's counting, were killed in a series of terror attacks which occurred simultaneously, in other words, all at the same time, by Islamic militant Fulani. They went church by church, house by house, selectively targeting the Christian houses and skipping over the others. Whole villages were razed and hundreds of Christians were displaced. So the attacks began the night of the 23rd, and they didn't stop until the other side of Christmas Day. So we're going to look at some of these where you will see what happened here in the region. Go ahead to the next slide. You see the church is burned out, the cars are burned out, and some massive graves. Another very recent, in March, another set of massive kidnappings happened just last month in March. The one that made the news was when 200 primary and secondary school students, along with their teachers, were abducted in Kaduna. So now we're going to move on to past slide. Here we are with Father Remy. We were just hearing about Bishop Wilfred Enagbe. So we're going to zoom in on this area. Father Remy and Bishop Wilfred Enagbe were the ones that came here. I'm getting a little more granular with this one particular state because I have had a lot of work with them, and they have been a partner of Aid to the Church in Need, which is a pontifical organization serving the persecuted church, and we've had at Sovereign the extreme honor to work with them and to help make their voices heard. But our partners, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe and Father Remigius Ihula, whom we call Father Remy, from the Diocese of Makurdi. They came and shared on Capitol Hill the effects of the violence on their state in particular. But to begin with, some stats. Benue State in the Middle Belt is also known as the breadbasket. They provide a lot of food. They're all subsistence farmers to a large degree. And so when they are pushed off of their land, guess what? Their farms go unattended. They can't even return to them, so they can't get food to eat. Nigeria has a food problem. Maybe they should just let their farmers return to their land. It has a population of 6 million, Benue State, and 99% are Christian. Therefore, the violence and the massacres occurring there are occurring against Christians. Full stop. In total, according to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, more than 3.6 million people in Nigeria have been displaced by such attacks, but the lion's share of these are in Benue. This morning, I received the following update on my chat with our friends over in Nigeria. This came from Father Remy. Another terrorist attack on the 13th of April, 2023. Some volunteer guards went to bury the dead bodies who had just been massacred days before. And on their way, as they proceeded to the burial process, and they moved to complete the burial process, on their way back, armed Fulani jihadists ambushed and killed them. Here are their names, 6 names. So you see, we're getting very granular here because I want to prove a point. These are people. These are lives. These are people with families, fathers, husbands, brothers. So what happens over time in the Middle Belt, once they're pushed off of their ancestral farmland, they are pushed into internally displaced people camps. And they don't have enough food because they can't farm their land. The United Nations says that there are 2.1 million internally displaced people in Benue State alone. The majority live in internally displaced people camps within host communities that surround the camps. Father Remy, who administers provisions to the IDP camps, has the majority of them in his diocese alone. He says by his count, it's more like 2.25 million displaced and in camps. That's 2.25 out of 6. That's more than a third of their population are living in shanties and camps like that. So these conditions are not fit for animals. We wouldn't allow our dogs in this country to live in that. And if we did, we'd be in trouble. The diocese and other charitable organizations are the only ones administering aid here. They're not getting our money. They're not getting USAID money. They have 14 IDP camps in Makurdi alone. They do not get money from USAID, and they don't even get UNHA funds. In fact, Benue, if you look at the list, is left off. They don't get the humanitarian aid funds from the UNHA. So, and in fact, it's taken an ungodly amount of time for us just to get them to notice. They have come last summer, finally, resident humanitarian coordinator of Nigeria, Dr. Matthias Schmal, made the observation when he visited the governor of Benue in Makurdi that the humanitarian crisis in the internally displaced persons camps in Benue State is worse than those in the northeastern part of Nigeria, particularly Borno State. So, why is this happening? You've heard a lot about that already. But if nothing is done about the militant Islamic terrorists and their egregious violence goes unchecked, it's only because the Nigerian government allows it. And Western governments like ours fail to hold Nigeria accountable, as we should. Many believe that the government is complicit, and that is what is happening, and that what is happening meets the definition of a Christian genocide. During one of his speeches, Bishop Anagbe was talking about the inaction and silence by both government and powerful stakeholders all over the world with regards to the plight of what is happening there. It seems like a conspiracy of silence. It seems like they want to let Islamists get away with genocide. Inter-Society also states that this situation is to be blamed on the Nigerian government and the security forces for failing to rise to the occasion. This is an example of that. There are countless reports from partners on the ground of people from villages and IDP camps calling their police as they were about to be ambushed and massacred. However, there was no response. It's all federal police, remember, it's not local, so they answer to the federal. However, there was no response. No one came until the next day when the slain victims were being prepared for burial. So what are we doing about this? We were talking about HRES 82. As you heard from Nadine, under the Trump administration, Nigeria was placed on the country of particular concern list, but Biden administration removed it on the eve that Secretary Blinken was set to meet with the Nigerian president. And there was no real explanation, as you also heard. So what are we doing now? We're trying to advance HRES 82, which we're referring to here as the Nigerian resolution. We need to help advance our U.S. foreign policy to take the correct position to defend human rights and dignity and to fight against this persecution. We are advocating to put Nigeria back on the country of particular concern list as defined by the International Religious Freedom Act. The United States Commission, which Nadine sat on as chairman and commissioner, is a bipartisan independent commission. So we know that there are folks from both parties on there, and they all have held that the State Department needs to put Nigeria back on the country of particular concern list. So it meets the criteria of CPC. We're sure of that. And, as it should, because human rights and human dignity is a bipartisan issue, or it should be. So this HRES 82 is sponsored by Representative Chris Smith and Representative Henry Cuellar. If you want to get somebody to sign on to it, those are the two offices that you need to call. It calls for, again, reinstating Nigeria on the CPC list, or asking the State Department to reinstate Nigeria on the CPC list, and a special envoy to be named to that region. It has already passed out of the Foreign Affairs Committee, which means it's in a very strong position, but we must get it voted on before June. So this is what you can do. We know that when the United States and its Western allies take a call and call for justice, the world stops and takes notice and starts to follow suit. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to applaud you for being here in person and online to join us in this discussion for which there is such inexplicable yet apparent apathy for these atrocities against human dignity and human rights. You are the exception, however, because you and I are here because we refuse to tolerate this injustice any longer. Please keep our brothers and sisters in Nigeria in your prayers and get everybody you know to support HRES 82. Human dignity and human rights matter, and they should be a part of our foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jacqueline. We all follow the facts and read the reports, but it means so much more and makes so much more of an impact when we hear the anecdotes from the ground and we see the photos of folks in IDP camps and survivors of this persecution. So thank you for that. Our final speaker this afternoon is Dr. Gregory Stanton. He's the founder and president of Genocide Watch. From 2010 to 2019, he was research professor in genocide studies and prevention at George Mason University. And from 2003 to 2009, he was professor of human rights at the University of Mary Washington. Dr. Stanton served at the U.S. State Department from 1992 to 1999, where he drafted the UN Security Council resolutions that created the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Thank you for being here, Dr. Stanton.
It's a great honor to be here with this distinguished panel and friends, people that we've worked with for years. Nadine, Bob, all of these folks who have been on the right side. And I don't mean just people who are because they're Christians, because we also have plenty of Muslims who are so horrified by what's happening in Nigeria. Since 2000, 62,000 Christians in Nigeria have been victims of genocide perpetrated by Islamist extremist groups, Boko Haram, Islamic State, West Africa Province, and organized Fulani jihadists. The International Committee on Nigeria calls this genocide the silent slaughter. 34,000 moderate Muslims have also been murdered by Islamist extremist groups since 2000. Leah Sharibu, one of 110 schoolgirls who were abducted by ISWAP militants in 2018, is still in captivity because she refuses to renounce her Catholic faith. In 2022, more than 50 parishioners at St. Francis Xavier Church in Owo were massacred. The Nigerian government blamed the massacre on ISWAP. Locals point to Fulani militias. Aid to the Church at Need reports that in 2022, 4 Catholic priests were killed in Nigeria and 23 priests were kidnapped. In April 2023, the International Society of Civil Liberties and Rule of Law, Intersociety, reported that since 2000, 18,000 Christian churches and 2,200 Christian schools have been deliberately set on fire. And of course, you've already heard, during the Christmas holiday in December 2023, over 200 Nigerian Christians were massacred in Plateau State in coordinated attacks by Fulani militias. What we are facing here is denial. Many of you are familiar with the 10 stages of genocide that we at Genocide Watch use to analyze genocide. Denial is present always in genocide from the beginning to the end and after. Denial is the main thing that stands in the way of action. And what we're seeing here is, in fact, denial. Denial that this is happening. I want to show you a video that one of Genocide Watch's wizards produced showing you the spread of jihadist infiltration and conquest in West Africa, in the Sahel, and in Nigeria. So go ahead and run that, if you will.
If I could just interrupt, if we can't silence that, if we can just remove it, that would be best. Thank you.
Oh, that's all right. This shows you, okay, we don't need to have it actually move. This shows you how pervasive these conquests have been. The green is Boko Haram. The red are the Fulani jihadists. You can see that now the Fulani jihadists are far more dangerous than Boko Haram. In fact, they have killed at least 15,000 Christians just since 2015. And yet, what are we facing? We're facing denial. Denial not only by the government of Nigeria, who say, oh no, this is, just tribal conflict. This is just ethnic conflict. They don't ever want to use the word genocide. Genocide is what is happening here. I've seen it before because I lived in Rwanda in 1988 and 89, 5 years before that genocide, and I predicted it. I predicted to the president himself that they would have a genocide within 5 years because you could see it coming. We already have genocide in Nigeria. And what is it being answered by in this country? Denial. The State Department, the Africa Bureau, the people who are in charge of our embassy in Abuja deny that it is genocide. They won't use the word. I remember reading a cable back in 1994 when the Rwandan genocide, in fact, did break out. A cable that came in right from the Defense Department the day after it started, saying, be careful of this word. If we use the word genocide, we might actually have to do something. That is what is happening now in Nigeria. We might actually have to do something because it is our fellow human beings, not just Christians, not just Muslims, our fellow human beings who are being slaughtered in this jihad. In this jihad by Fulani extremists, by Boko Haram, by others who would like to impose their form of extremist Islam on all of Nigeria. This is a problem we have to face. I cannot believe that a person who used to be my congressman, Gerald Connolly, led the Democrats in the Foreign Affairs Committee to vote against Resolution 82. I still don't understand that. Are they listening to the State Department who don't want to admit it and realize we might actually have to do something? Maybe so. But I do know this. We have to make this a bipartisan effort to help the Nigerian government. It has to be a Nigerian solution to help the Nigerian government defeat these jihadists. That is going to take money. It's going to take assistance, military assistance. It's going to take all of the kinds of assistance that we are so able to give and yet are not giving. That is what I'm calling for today. Let's pass Resolution 82. Let's get the State Department to organize its own resistance to this. Let's act now. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Sen, and you're absolutely right. HRS 82, as of right now, has, I believe, 26 co-sponsors, 25 of whom are Republican, which to me leaves me scratching my head, because if you read the language, it's not a partisan piece of legislation by any stretch. It clearly and accurately reflects the situation on the ground in Nigeria that all of our expert speakers reflected here today. So if you're here in attendance, a staffer with the Democratic office, please feel free to talk to any of our experts. Us from In Defense of Christians, we can chat with you on how we can get your office to co-sponsor this legislation, because it's extremely important. And again, once we identify what it is, the fear by the administration, specifically the State Department, is identifying it as a genocide means we now have to treat it as such. So that's also a stumbling block that is not, however, insurmountable. I want to thank our speakers today. But before ending, I would love to invite you all, our guests, to ask questions. There's a mic here. Please feel free to make your way up.
Hello, my name is Judd Saul. I'm with Equipping the Persecuted. We are a boots-on-the-ground mission in Nigeria helping persecuted Christians. I'd like to just make it openly available so you guys know. We created a project called truthnigeria.com where we are reporting on what's actually happening in Nigeria. And I just like to add a couple of things that we've noticed. Truth Nigeria has put out well over 30 terror alerts through our intelligence network that we've created. We know when they're going to attack. We know where they're going to attack. And we are about 30 for 30 in accurately predicting what's going on. These terror alerts are sent to the military. They're sent to the police. They're sent to the government. And every single time, the police, the military, no government officials have intervened in one attack. We have given them 48 hours notice, and there's no military or police intervention. And then our organization is there, left to pick up the pieces. We respond to attacks within 48 hours. And I can attest that USAID, no government money is getting to the people that need it. None of it. And about half the IDP camps that exist are not recognized by the Nigerian government, by USAID, by the UN. They are living in complete squalor. And so I want to make it a plea to everybody in the room. Resources, not just through the federal government, need to get to the people that need it most. Because I'm there, I go there 4 times a year. I have a staff of 100 people. We are there to pick up the pieces when these attacks happen. And just to be honest, I see very little effort from U.S. organizations or foreign organizations actually helping persecuted Christians on the ground. So that's also my plea, is to get resources to those that need it most. And thank you all for your work. We're pushing this. I'm telling all of our supporters to call their congressmen and senators to push this resolution. We need to get it done, but it also needs to be followed up with more awareness and action. And those of you that are reporting on this, I just like to say, we need to make these corrupt government officials famous. We need to make them famous for their war crimes and looking the other way, if not being complicit in these attacks. So thank you all. God bless you.
Hello, my name is Ghassan Boudiab. I'm from the Demokratia Center for Research and Strategic Studies. I'm personally specialized in faith-based extremism. I would like to ask Honorable about the role of the Islamic Republic of Iran in funding the Islamic movement and the Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki. On the other hand, also, what's the role of other countries in funding Boko Haram? And is there certain political pressure that could be done on the IRGC, because it's known that Nigeria is very rich in minerals and resources, and some say that some of the uranium found there is going somewhere where it shouldn't be going. So what do you think about that? Thank you.
Well, I think it's a very good question. I'm sorry I'm going to have to give you a short answer, but what we need with respect to the money is a map like this. That it's not just coming from Iran, it's coming from the West, it's coming from Turkey, it's coming from China, it's coming from all over the place. You know, it's coming from the Gulf states. You know, there are young people who have picked up cell phones and they see the Boko Haram people standing next to Turkish soldiers. You know, so it's, if you actually were to look at this as a, where is the money coming that's feeding the brightness of the green and the red, then there would be not only people who are antithetical to the United States, like the IRGC, but there would also be some friends.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Benga Ogunjimi. I'm from the Nigerian Center here in Washington, D.C. Nigerian Center is a local 501c3 that is advocating for Nigeria as well. And I want to uplift an ongoing campaign, because it was said on this panel that what we need to hear from, who we need to hear from are Nigerians on the ground. Last year, and also early this year, over 100 Nigerian American organizations, including Amnesty International, faith-based organization, asked the Biden administration to petition to designate Nigeria for TPS, temporary protected status, DED, and SSR, special student relief. Because of this ongoing armed conflict, a lot of Nigerians are coming to the United States for refuge. In the same vein, over 20, close to 25 on the Democrat side, Congress members are co-sponsors to the TPS Nigerian letter. Are there opportunities to expand HRS 82? Because we already have a base of over 20 on the Democratic side favoring Nigeria on the Hill. We have for religious freedom, and the concerns, and as you raised, sir, some of on the other side has, is HRS 82 designate Nigeria as a country of concern. Some of the fears the community has, it withholds military support. It places conditions upon it. It escalates violence. And while we are looking for a long-term solution, can we look at opportunity for those who are in the United States seeking sanctuary? Can this bill be expanded to provide solutions for them? You bring up Nigeria, they say nothing is going on, but you look on the State Department's report, they designate these terror groups, but there's no immediate relief for Nigerians. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Mia Baxley. I'm the Scoville Peace Fellow at Search for Common Ground and also a former intern at Genocide Watch. So I just wanted to, less of a question and more of a general comment for everyone in the room and for the panel. So what Search for Common Ground does in Nigeria and across the Sahel and the broader Sudano-Sahel and in 33 countries around the world is that we focus on the social level and the people who are already doing what they feel needs to be done in their communities. They know exactly the dynamics that they would need to work with. It's just that so many of them are lacking the resources and support. So what we do is that we have teams in the countries to help support them. And the best way to address the crisis in Nigeria, not just with religious persecution, but with all kinds of intercommunal violence, is to empower those who are currently lacking the ones most lacking the resources. So not just the religious communities, but the women inside the religious communities and the youth inside the religious communities, and those even outside of it who are acting not in the context of addressing religious engagement, but also just bringing each other together in forums and community sessions. So yeah, when you think of Nigeria and when you keep Nigeria in mind, think of those that want to do the work and need a leg up to do so. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I think some of the panelists know me. I'm Doug Burton. I'm the editor-in-chief of TruthNigeria.com. Many thanks to Mr. Judd Saul and and Equipping the Persecuted. So I have a question that I'd like to offer up to anyone who would like to respond, especially to our good friend, Dr. Gregory Stanton and Mr. Kola Alapini, world-famous religious freedom lawyer. Now, today we've heard that there is a genocide in Nigeria, though our government authorities will not acknowledge it. But there's apparently evidence of it. Now, I'd like to ask you about the sector of public opinion that hasn't been discussed today, and that is the role of the civil society groups outside of government. I know the government, I'm a former State Department official myself, by the way, so I'm going to say something about our government that's a little critical. In this building, people believe that government decides everything. The government solves every problem. It takes a long time to solve these problems. They're so big and so expensive. But actually, much of the action of government depends upon people in the private sector. I'm speaking about church people. It used to be a lot of people, most people in this country used to believe in God. Now it's in question. But we still have a lot of people going to church. And in the Washington, D.C. area, I live in Maryland, there are a lot of Nigerian churches, as Mr. Alapini knows. A lot. Hundreds. There's hundreds of Nigerian churches just in Maryland. I'm sure that there's probably hundreds in Northern Virginia. And I think, Mr. Stanton, you're a churchgoer, I'm guessing. Now, I am a journalist. I read about demonstrations and rallies regarding persecution in Nigeria. I've never seen a Nigerian church sponsor one, except I helped sponsor one in my church, a little church, a Nigerian church in Hyattsville, Maryland. But my question is, why isn't there outrage? Why aren't the Nigerian Americans standing up and protesting the genocide on their watch? Why are not the white Americans in this country who've hung their heads in shame and said, well, we should have done more. We should have done more for the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. Well, we just didn't know that much about it. Well, we should have done more to stop the genocide in Rwanda. President Clinton later apologized. Give him credit. He apologized for not taking action during that genocide. Now, where are the church members in America today? And why aren't the Nigerian pastors, thousands of them, many of them very wealthy, why are they not speaking up?
Since you asked me, I best answer. And by the way, Doug, I want to thank you for founding Truth Nigeria, because if you want to read what Doug and his amazing news source now produce, Truth Nigeria, we publish it on our Genocide Watch website. And that gets it out to thousands of people every time they publish. The answer, and I think you're really right, this should be something that every church should be involved in. This is a genocide against Christians. I remember the Save Darfur movement, and one of the things that churches did during the Save Darfur movement is they were awake. They said, this is wrong. We must do something about this. And of course, you got plenty of Hollywood actors and others who were very involved too. I was just at a demonstration yesterday about the genocide that's occurring in Sudan, in Darfur. Again, that genocide's not over. In other words, it has come back. 15,000 people were murdered in just one town in Sudan, El Janina, last year, by the Janjaweed. That is the same people who were committing the genocide there in 2003 and 4. Well, in Nigeria, this has been a constant and gnawing problem that has grown and grown and grown. And you're right. The churches should be involved. The churches should be aware. I think we need to develop a strategy to do that. I think particularly that we need to get the Conference of Catholic Bishops in this country to speak out on this. We need to get the Conference of Catholic Bishops in Nigeria to speak out on it. We need to get the churches. One of the good things about the Presbyterian Church, which I belong to, and by the way, you know, Americans may have their doubts about the existence of God, but I do know that God doesn't have any doubt about the existence of Americans. You know, we have a responsibility. And so you're right. We must activate that deep faith that is in fact what drives change, what drives the civil rights movement in this country. I remember, I grew up in it. And that is what changed America. And we can do the same kind of thing for Nigeria.
Thank you for that. That's a great question. And thank you for your answer, Dr. Sten. From my perspective, and I'm not going to attempt to speak from the perspective of Nigerian Christians in the diaspora, but I can speak universally that this phenomenon is widely observed for Middle East Christians in the diaspora as well, in the United States particularly, where fear in the homeland was so pervasive and follows them to the diaspora, where they're here in the United States and they still feel that fear of the government, of answering for your actions and omissions to the government, or family back home having to do so. You'll see that often in the Coptic community here in the United States, the Syriac and Assyrian community here in the United States, where they've been so conditioned back home to having the government monitoring all of their activities, where any political activity is perceived as hazardous. So that's, again, not sure if that's reflective of the Nigerian situation, but that's certainly a universal observation in the Middle East. If we have one more question, we certainly have time for one more. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Lucky Idike and I live in Nigeria, and I'd like to make a few remarks. The first thing I'd like to say is that there is genocide, there's a lot of killing in Nigeria, but it's not only Christians that are getting killed.
That's right.
Killing on both sides of the divide. So while there's a tension on the killing of Christians, I think we should just focus on stopping the killings altogether. Now, there's a dangerous trend that I've noticed in Nigeria, and that is that people who were militant, either Fulani terrorists or armed bandits, who say they've repented and changed their minds, they're now being absorbed into quasi-military organizations like a constabulary. And then from there, they find their way into the police or the armed forces.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, these people, I mean, they have an ideology, right? I don't think the repentance process changes that ideology. So I'm afraid that we might be breeding a bunch of people who are being armed by the state, whose loyalty is not to the state. I think it's something that you need to think about. And he made a comment that's very interesting. We hear a lot of stories that all these attacks are driven by a quest to extract minerals without paying proper royalties for that. So where's the money going? if you find the people who are buying these minerals, if you stop the flow of money, you will stop the need for killings. Does that make sense? I think so. So those are my comments. And so I want to say one more thing. We talked about the Nigerian church and how they don't seem to be picking up the fight. So I live in southern Nigeria, and you know, if you hear stories every day of people being killed, sadly, you do tend to become desensitized to these things. And I think for a lot of Nigerians, we're at that point where we've seen so many gory pictures, we've heard so many horrible stories, that maybe we're a bit desensitized. And maybe that's what the church is doing. Maybe it's the fear of political persecution for their families, like he said. I don't know. But I am grateful for the spotlight that you're shining on this travesties in Nigeria, and I wish that it's profitable and it's beneficial. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Okay. I want to thank my brother who just spoke now. I think he mirrored my views. I granted an interview to the Vanguard newspaper 2 days ago. If you Google my name and type Vanguard newspaper, the article will come out. There's no one single solution to what is happening in Nigeria. He talked about people being absorbed back into the military. We have actually turned the security industry into a gold mine. People are getting contracts. There's no reason, there's no correlation between the amount of monies Nigeria has committed into providing security, and we're not seeing any results for it. It's almost like America, who spent 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq and pulled out and nothing happened. It was as if nothing was achieved in 20 years of being in Afghanistan. And it's crazy. I was in Rwanda 7 years after the genocide. You know, as you rightly said, there was a systematic planning of what was going to go on. And 7 years after the genocide, I was an international scholar in South Africa, and we went on a field trip, 1 week in Kigali and 1 week in Arusha to observe the tribunal itself. And we went on the length and breadth of Rwanda, from all sorts, from Kivu to this. We were everywhere. Gitarama, the churches, interestingly, some of the churches even played a part in the genocide. So people ran to the churches for refuge, and the pastors were calling the Interamwe to come. You know, we went to the football field where about 50,000 people were slaughtered, and the French troops looked the other way, and some even said they participated in the genocide. So, and we can see this pattern, whether we like it or not, happening to Nigeria slowly. We might not want to believe the truth. We might deny it, but it's coming and it's knocking its door. And I hope it doesn't happen. The US government apologized, and President Clinton, the UN got it wrong. Kofi Annan was head of the DPKO. The Canadian general kept on sending messages. They're coming for us. They're coming. This thing is going to happen. Everybody turned their blind eyes. It appears Nigeria is following that path. If nothing is done drastically, the whole world will not sleep in peace if anything happens to Nigeria. In the western part of Nigeria, there are 35 or 40 million Yorubas there. That's more than the population of the whole of West Africa. If a refugee crisis happens, and how many people are you going to shoot from going into the border west of Nigeria into Benin Republic? So the western part of Nigeria is going to wipe out the whole of West Africa from the refugee situation. You know, not to talk of people going up north in the Sahel, and also we need to do something really critical. I brought this up. I was in a very difficult position earlier this year when I was given an award by the Secretary of State for international religious freedom. And I was at the risk of upsetting my benefactor, in quotes, when I brought up the issue of Nigeria, but I had to bring it. And I said, we were all hoping that you would put back Nigeria on the CPC list, and you didn't. May I know your reasons why you didn't do so? I couldn't speak to the Secretary of State directly because he left for Israel, and then he went to Nigeria the following week. And a very senior high-ranking official, I don't want to mention who he was, because I believe it was a private conversation. And this individual said, Nigeria does not, because these things are happening at state level, and the Nigerian government, they deal with the Nigerian government at government-to-government level, and the Nigerian government is not, it's not the one doing these acts. So they have this checklist, and if it doesn't fall within this checklist, there's nothing they can really do. And I was alarmed. It's either someone is getting their briefings wrong, like they got it wrong in Rwanda, or the people who write the reports are not telling the truth. And as I said, the things happening in Nigeria is a hydra-headed monster. Russia is involved in northern Nigeria, the Sahel, and you can see what happened with all the coups and all that. The French are involved. Everybody around us speak French. The Chinese are involved as well. And I think that the United States government does not want to lose Nigeria than the influence they have there. That's why they're kind of having a carrot and stick approach. And because if you offend the government of Nigeria, why should we do business with the US? They're just going to turn to China. China is taking over everywhere. And we just bought a few choppers for $500 million. So you might also look at the economic aspect of it, or let's not offend the Nigerians. They still roll out the red carpet, and we're able to talk to them, and they listen to us. So it's all sorts going on there, but the innocent people are, the ordinary people out there. There's no reason why cattle herders will carry an AK-47 and walk around without being arrested. There's no reason why cattle herders or Fulani herdsmen will attack a church on Pentecost Day in Owo and kill 40 people. There's no reason why Fulani herdsmen would come up with AK-47 on days before Christmas and just shoot people, and the United States government is going to say it's climate change. There's no grass for the cattle to eat up north anymore, and desertification is driving them south. And regarding the churches, which we've all talked about, it's alarming. There's no one answer. We have just commercialized churches in Nigeria, whether we like it or not. It's all in Jesus' name PLC. It's a company. That's the brand of Christianity which you see largely in my country now. You go to a church on a Sunday and they're calling for donations after donations and taxing the people heavily. And you have the general overseers all flying in private jets and using limousines, and they come here, and the churches here they just come and mine gold here. They're looking for dollars. Chase them back and go and face the problem in Nigeria. Don't come and do any crusade in America. Don't welcome them anymore. Go back home and fix the issues. And another thing the US government can do is to place travel bans on our politicians and their direct families. Where all these issues are happening, or all this Islamization or Sharia thing is going on, and they attack, if the governors are not responsive to security, let me tell you how to get a Nigerian politician and get his attention. He comes here and when I mean here, I mean the West. He comes for medical care. His children are in school here because they've run the educational system aground in Nigeria. Our hospitals, which used to be the best in West Africa, and other countries used to come, we've run it aground. Our president even sat in London for 6 months in an hospital and parked the presidential jet there. The hospitals don't work. Put a ban on them and their immediate families, especially the wives and the children. If the wife is not able to come for shopping in America or Paris and everything, you will believe me, these things are going to be sorted. Because she's going to tell her husband, I don't want any problem. I want to be able to travel to the US or the UK. Go and sort this issue out. And don't let them stop my children from coming to school. And you will see, once there is civil war in the home, the politicians will sit upright. Thank you very much.
Can I just add one thing? I just wanted to first of all congratulate you on your award. As you just said, in January, the State Department honored him for his advocacy in representing, in particular, blasphemy and apostasy victims in Nigeria, which to me was so interesting because that's almost like acknowledging the problem in Nigeria by giving you this award for doing the amazing work that you've done as an advocate for them in particular, but all the work you've done. But I think the point they're missing is, the way the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 is written is a country is supposed to be designated a country of particular concern if they engage in or tolerate egregious, systematic, and ongoing violations of religious freedom. And so even if the federal government isn't engaging in it themselves, although there are laws that are obviously violating religious freedom that they are a part of, they're tolerating it. And so it's really empty for there to not be for that to be the excuse of why they haven't designated them. But I do think that these kind of events and this kind of pressure and the resolution that if we can get that passed, so those kind of things, I do think the State Department could be moved on this.
Thank you all. I want to thank you all for being here, of course, but also thank our expert panel for their insights today. And of course, members of Congress who showed up today to share their thoughts as well. Congressman Rose and Congressman James for their support. And of course, the House Subcommittee on Africa for making today's event possible. You can find us online at indefenseofchristians.org. Our YouTube channel has all of our events. If you've missed, well, you didn't miss today, but if you missed any in the past that you may be interested in, you can find it there as well as our social media. Thanks for being here today and have a great day.